The envelope was already open when I found it, tucked behind the dryer like someone had hidden it in a hurry. My hand went still the moment I pulled it free. The handwriting on the front wasn't mine. It wasn't my husband's either. It was hers. Looping, urgent, pressed too hard into the paper like the pen might run out before she finished saying what she needed to say. Read this alone. Don't let him see you read it. My name is Nora Callahan. And until that Tuesday morning, I would have described my husband as imperfect, but safe. Marcus worked long hours. He forgot anniversaries. He could go 3 days without really looking at me, the kind of not looking that felt deliberate once you noticed it. But dangerous? No. I never once reached for that word. I stood there in the laundry room, with the dryer still tumbling behind me, and my heart suddenly very loud in my ears. I pulled the letter out slowly, the way you pull a bandage off when you're not sure what's underneath. Nora, I know you don't know why he fired me. He told you I stole, didn't he? I didn't steal anything. I found something. Something he keeps in the locked drawer of his desk, the one he told you holds client files. It doesn't. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you to your face. I was afraid of what he'd do if he knew I talked to you. Check the drawer, please. The key is taped to the underside of the nightstand on his side of the bed. I kept a copy before I left. Diane. My fingers went cold. Diane Holloway had worked for us for 11 months. She was 53 years old, drove a silver Honda, and brought homemade cornbread to our house every time there was a holiday. Marcus had fired her 6 days ago. He said she'd been going through his things. He said she was a thief. He said it so calmly, so completely, that I hadn't questioned a single word of it. I stood in the laundry room for a long time, reading the letter twice more, then once again after that. The dryer buzzed. I didn't move. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation, that Diane was bitter about being let go, that this was exactly the kind of thing a disgruntled employee would do to cause trouble on the way out. I told myself that Marcus was many things, but he wasn't the kind of man who kept secrets in locked drawers. I almost convinced myself. But Diane had worked for us for 11 months. She brought cornbread. She fed our cat when we were away. She wasn't the type. And the thing about the letter that I couldn't shake, the thing that kept pulling me back, was that it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't hysterical. It was careful, methodical, like someone who'd thought a long time about what to say and how to say it because they knew they only had one chance. I folded the letter into the pocket of my jeans and walked down the hall toward our bedroom. The nightstand was dark walnut, heavy, the kind of furniture Marcus had picked without asking my opinion. I crouched beside it slowly, reached underneath, and ran my fingers along the flat base. The key was there. Small, silver, taped with a strip of electrical tape. My hand was shaking when I peeled it free. I heard the garage door open. The sound hit me like cold water. Marcus's car. His schedule had him in meetings until 6, and it was barely noon. I shoved the key into my bra, stood up so fast I went dizzy, and walked straight to the bathroom, turned the faucet on, gripped the edge of the sink and stared at my own face in the mirror until I looked less like someone who'd just found a key hidden in her own bedroom without knowing it was there. He called my name from the entryway, easy, unhurried. Hey, I called back, just freshening up. I heard his footsteps move through the kitchen, pause. The fridge opening. The fridge closing. When he came to the bathroom doorway, he was loosening his collar, looking at his phone. He barely glanced at me. Left my laptop, he said. Oh. I kept my voice flat, normal. Busy day? Always. He didn't look up from his phone. I'll be back around 7. Don't wait on dinner. He went to his office. I heard the door close. I stood at the sink with the faucet still running and counted to 60 before I turned it off. 3 minutes later, I heard him leave. The garage door rumbled shut and I sat down on the bathroom floor and put my head between my knees until the nausea passed. He hadn't looked at the nightstand. He hadn't looked at me closely enough to see anything was wrong. But for 30 seconds in that doorway, I had been absolutely certain he knew. I don't know how long I sat on that floor, long enough for the light through the window to shift slightly. Long enough to have the silent argument with myself 3 or 4 times over the one where half of me said, put the key back, pretend you never found the letter, let this go, and the other half said something quieter and more stubborn that I didn't have a word for yet. I got up. I walked to his office. Marcus's office was the one room in the house that felt more like his than ours. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Dark curtains he kept half drawn even during the day. His desk sat against the far wall, wide, mahogany, the kind of desk that cost more than our first car. I had never once been asked to decorate this room. I had understood, without being told, that I wasn't supposed to. The locked drawer was the bottom right one. I'd always assumed it held what he said it held. NDAs, client contracts, proprietary work material he wasn't allowed to share. I had never tested the assumption because I'd never had a reason to. My hands were steadier than I expected as I fit the key into the lock. It clicked open on the first try. For a moment, I just stared at what was inside, because my mind refused to immediately process what my eyes were seeing. There were documents, a manila folder thick with papers. Below it, a small black notebook with a red elastic band. And beneath that, a prepaid cell phone, powered off, the kind you buy with cash. I lifted the folder first. The top page was a form from an insurance company. Marcus's handwriting was in the beneficiary section. His name, the policy, was in my name. $2 million. The date on the form was 8 months ago. We had never discussed life insurance. I had never signed anything. My signature was on the bottom of the form. In my name. In handwriting that was close enough to mine that I almost had to look twice. Almost. I turned to the next page. And the next. Medical evaluation forms from a clinic I'd never visited, signed by a doctor whose name I didn't recognize, describing a patient, describing me with a history of severe depressive episodes, erratic behavior, and documented self-destructive tendencies. The dates on the form spanned the past year. I had not been depressed. I had not been erratic. I had gone to work every day and come home and cooked dinner and lived my quiet, ordinary life. And whoever had written these documents had invented a version of me that didn't exist. The third document was an email printout. Marcus had sent it to his brother 6 weeks ago. Things are getting worse with Nora. The episodes are more frequent. I've consulted with her doctor, and we agree that if something happens, it won't be a surprise to anyone who knows the situation. I wanted you to know in advance so the family isn't blindsided. My husband had been building a story, carefully, methodically, the same way Diane had written her letter, because he too understood that you only get one chance to tell a version of events that sticks. Except his version ended with me gone. I stood in that office for a long time, long enough that the light through the half-drawn curtains shifted from white to amber. I didn't cry. I was surprised to find I didn't want to. What I felt instead was something colder and sharper, a clarity I hadn't known I was capable of, the kind that arrives when fear finally burns all the way down to its cleanest form. I took out my phone. I photographed every page of every document. I photographed the prepaid phone still in the drawer. I photographed the black notebook inside it were dates, numbers, a few names I didn't recognize, and a rough timeline labeled end departure with a bracket around a window of dates 4 months from now. I put everything back exactly as I had found it. I relocked the drawer. I pressed the tape back against the underside of the nightstand. Then I went to the kitchen and started making dinner, because Marcus would be home at 7, and I needed him to see exactly what he expected to see. The next morning, he kissed my cheek before work and told me I looked tired. I smiled and told him I hadn't been sleeping well. He said he had noticed. The way he said it, so soft, so full of practiced concern, made my stomach drop. He was watching. He had been watching for a while. Every comment, every pointed observation about my sleep and my moods and my bad days. He had been building his case out loud, depositing it into the memories of everyone around us, so that later they would nod and say yes. He mentioned she was struggling. It was a long time coming. I waited until his car turned out of the neighborhood. Then I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my sister in Portland. I told her I needed to send her some files for safekeeping, and she wasn't to open them unless I called her with a specific phrase. She didn't ask questions. We had always understood each other. The second call was to a lawyer I found through a legal aid organization, a woman named Carla Voss, who specialized in cases involving financial fraud and domestic abuse. I told her I had documents. She told me to come in the next day, bring everything, and tell no one. The third call was to a private investigator named Ray Hollenbeck, who was recommended by Carla's office. He was quiet on the phone, economical with words, which I appreciated. He told me the prepaid phone and the forged signatures alone were enough to open a criminal investigation. He told me not to confront Marcus. He told me to behave normally for as long as I could stand it. I told him I could stand it as long as I needed to. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a careful, deliberate version of myself. I made dinners. I asked Marcus about his day. I laughed at the appropriate moments and looked tired when I was supposed to look tired, and worried when I was supposed to look worried. I had never realized until then how much of my energy I had always spent trying to match whatever emotional frequency Marcus brought home, how long I had been performing a version of contentment that kept the temperature of our house manageable. The difference now was that I knew I was performing, and that changed everything. Marcus grew bolder in those 2 weeks in ways I hadn't anticipated. Small things, but I saw them now with new eyes. He mentioned to our neighbors, within my earshot, that I had been going through something. He suggested, gently, that I should consider talking to someone professional. He brought home a book about anxiety with the tone of a man being publicly patient with a difficult wife. I thanked him for the book. I put it on my nightstand. I took photographs of every page I could find in his office during the 40-minute window each morning, between when he left and when his office camera, a small one, angled toward the door, which I discovered on day 3, would have a clear shot of my face. I had been careful about the camera. I was careful about everything. Ray called me on a Wednesday afternoon while Marcus was at work. He had pulled records on the insurance policy. The signature was provably forged. My real signature had distinct characteristics that the forged version didn't replicate consistently. The clinic that had produced the mental health evaluation forms had no record of treating any patient with my name or date of birth. The doctor's license number on the forms had expired 4 years ago. He also told me he had found a woman in Marcus's phone records. Not a girlfriend, or not only that, a former paralegal with a fraud conviction from 2019. The calls had started 18 months ago. Ray believed she was the one who had helped Marcus produce the paperwork. On the day I was ready, I came home to find Marcus already there. He was in the kitchen with a glass of wine, which was unusual. He watched me come through the door with an expression I now recognized, carefully arranged concern with something colder underneath it. He asked if I'd had a good afternoon. I told him I'd been running errands. He asked which ones. That question would have seemed normal to me 8 weeks ago. Now I heard it for what it was. An accounting. A check on my movements. Just the grocery store and the pharmacy, I said. I picked up more of my prescription. I didn't have a prescription. But Marcus nodded slowly, like he was filing the information away. He made an elaborate dinner that night, which he rarely did. Poured me wine without asking, sat across from me and talked about a vacation somewhere remote, he said, somewhere quiet where we could reconnect. Just the two of us. He named a place in Montana, off the grid, 3 hours from the nearest town. I told him it sounded perfect. He smiled and reached across the table and covered my hand with his. Later that night, after he'd fallen asleep, I lay in the dark and thought about Diane Holloway, who had worked in our home for 11 months and seen enough to be afraid, who had been called a thief and quietly pushed out and risked reaching back across that boundary anyway because she couldn't make herself let it go. I thought about what it must have cost her to write that letter, to tape the key to the nightstand and hope I would find it in time. I made a mental note to find her, to tell her, once all of this was over, that she had saved my life. The following Thursday, Marcus came home to find 3 police cars parked in front of the house. He slowed as he turned into the driveway, and I watched from the front window as his face went through several expressions very quickly before settling on confused and cooperative, the same face he used whenever he needed someone to believe him. Detective Michelle Okafor met him at the door. She had the insurance documents. She had the forged signatures and the expired medical license. She had the phone records linking Marcus to the paralegal and a warrant to search both his office and the prepaid phone, which Ray had traced back to a purchase at a gas station 40 minutes from our house, paid in cash, on the same day Marcus had told me he was in Chicago for a conference. I stood in the hallway and watched my husband's face change again when he finally looked past Detective Okafor and saw me. It wasn't anger. It was something more disorienting than that. He looked at me the way you look at something familiar that has just revealed itself to be something else entirely. Like a wall you've been leaning against for years suddenly turning out to have a door in it. Nora, he said. Just my name. Quiet. You should talk to the detective, I told him. He was cooperative until he wasn't. He went rigid when they moved to his office. He said something about a lawyer in a voice that had dropped all of its warmth, all of the careful textures he usually kept layered over everything he said to me. Underneath it, there was something flat and cold that I recognized immediately as the thing he'd always been keeping just out of view. I stepped outside while they searched the house. Our neighbor Carol was watering her roses, and she stopped when she saw me, concern moving across her face, the way it does when someone has heard things. She started to say something about being sorry, something about not knowing, and I held up a hand gently. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm actually okay." I meant it. Marcus was charged with insurance fraud, document forgery, and criminal conspiracy. The paralegal cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced charge and confirmed that Marcus had approached her nearly 2 years ago with a proposal he'd described, according to her statement, as straightforward. He had intended it to look like a breakdown, a downward spiral, carefully documented, witnessed by friends and neighbors and family who had been primed over months to nod and say, "Yes, we saw it coming." The insurance payout would have gone to him as surviving spouse. The Montana trip, according to the search of his phone, had a second leg I hadn't known about, a return flight booked only in his name. I didn't attend the arraignment. I drove to Portland instead and sat in my sister's kitchen and drank coffee and let her hold my hand for a while without talking. She asked me later, when we were calmer, how I had managed to stay in that house for 3 weeks knowing what I knew. I thought about it for a moment. I told her I'd had a good reason to. Months later, I met Diane for coffee at a diner halfway between her apartment and mine. She was smaller than I remembered, without the house around her. She kept apologizing for the letter, for not doing more, for being afraid. I told her the letter was enough. The letter was everything. She looked out the window for a moment with the expression of someone setting something down that they've been carrying too long. "I almost didn't leave it," she said. "I must have picked it up and put it down a dozen times." I thought, what if she doesn't believe me? What if she tells him? What if I'm wrong and I'm just a bitter old woman who got fired and is trying to make trouble? "You weren't wrong," I said. "No," she said. "I wasn't." We split the check. When we hugged goodbye outside, she held on for a second longer than expected, and I let her, because I understood what it meant. Some things you carry alone for so long that when someone finally takes the other end of the weight, the relief of it is almost overwhelming. I drove home alone. New apartment, 3rd floor, windows facing east, so the morning light comes in clean and early. I made dinner for one and ate it at my kitchen table and sat with the quiet for a while. The real quiet, the kind that doesn't have anything hiding underneath it. I had spent years learning to live inside a silence I didn't understand. Now I was finally learning what silence was supposed to feel like.